Hi, everybody. I am a Woodstock resident as of 2 years, although I live pretty much in the suburbs of Woodstock, down near Johnson Creek at 43rd and Lexington. So I wanted to share a bit about the city budget and the budget process. We have to, and I apologize, I forgot to bring a paper copy of the budget calendar, so I'm reading it off my phone. We need to approve a city budget by, technically by June 18th, because the fiscal year ends at the end of June. But hopefully we'll have it more or less wrapped up a fair amount ahead of that. And the city budget goes, there's like the bureaus that get have their own dedicated funding, and that money can't be spent on anything else, like water and sewer, are obvious ones. And then there's the Bureau of Transportation that has a variety of funding sources, but those two can only be spent on transportation. The local gas tax, state and federal gas tax money that we get, various other goals. So you'll have heard about the city's deficit, and you'll have heard maybe about $100 million deficit. Well, that's really only about the city's general fund, which the vast majority of which goes to police, fire, parks, and as of more recently, housing and homeless services. PBOT also has a deficit of, I think, about $40 million, which means they're gonna have to make even deeper cuts than they've been making in recent years. I mean, they've been hemorrhaging money because the gas tax doesn't bring in as much money, and we don't have as much parking revenues, because we don't want parking as much as they have to have parking garages, etc. So there's a whole horrific list of cuts that PBOT is probably gonna suffer unless we figure out some way to raise revenue. And then there's the general fund bureaus. And right now they're saying we have a $92 million deficit, and that's a result of property tax revenues have stopped going up, largely because the downtown is empty, and those buildings aren't worth as much as they used to. And also, we paid for some things in both public safety and homeless services with federal funds that were one-time funds that are now expiring. So you could say, well, if they were one time, just let them go, but there was some pretty important stuff. And then another amount that's added into the quote deficit is the mayor wants to spend $28 million opening up nighttime and some daytime shelters as part of his plan to end unsheltered homelessness. So that adds to the total amount. So last week, the city administrator sent us a document where he recommended a bunch of cuts adding up to about $35 million. A lot of them were in parks, a bunch of them were in some smaller bureaus. And then he said, okay, you've got $52 million city council, you figure out what else you want to cut. Which is, that is our job. So we're going to be looking at, unfortunately, largely it's going to be police, fire, some of the smaller public safety programs like the C-Spire program, which is non-police officers doing outreach to people at risk of gun violence, and the Portland Street Response, which you probably heard of. And then there's the homeless services in the parks, and the parks again are already slotted for significant cuts to the administrator's budget. So in terms of, and then the other question is, should we try to raise revenue? The governor has told us, Portland, you should not try to raise taxes in the next 3 years. The business community says, well, the Portland Metro Chamber says, if you try to raise a single tax a penny, we will pile on you like a ton of bricks. But as we start looking at the cuts we're going to have to make, I think that at least we need to consider the possibility of raising some revenue somehow. In terms of the calendar, I'm on the Public Safety Committee and the Climate Resilience and Parks Committee. So in both those committees, we'll be like hearing from the bureaus, asking them for various scenarios of how you could build your budget with various amounts of money. So that's going to be part of the process. Another part of the process will be, we're going to be having some public listening sessions, including one in each district from between March 17th and 21st. I actually thought we had the dates nailed down to which district, which day, which district, but apparently we don't. So be on the lookout. There will be one in District 3, but people are welcome to come to any of them. It doesn't have to be one of your districts. And Councilor Clayana Lane and Councilor Rio and I think, are probably going to arrange for at least one more budget listening session, probably in April. rather than just having one in the district in mid-March. Then the mayor proposes his budget on May 5th, and then we, over the next few weeks, have to propose any amendments to his budget and have all budget discussions until we come up with something that the council will agree on. And it's kind of weird to me, well, I was on the council 10 years ago when the mayor proposed a budget, and the mayor was also one of 5 votes of the city council. Now the mayor is no longer a vote of the city council, so it's kind of this funny thing where the mayor still proposes the budget, but he has no power over what happens after that. I mean, well, he has influence, but not power. So, I mean, what we're gonna be asking folks to do, and I'd ask you to start doing now, is weigh in on how you think we should go about these cuts and divide them up among those bureaus. And if you think that instead of, to fill part of it, there's some tax we should raise somehow. Because if you go through the bureaus, I mean, the parks already have a huge maintenance deficit. Which maybe means we should close some of the parks facilities that might have to close in 10 years anyway, put them out of the misery, but there's a lot of them. And people love the parks, and people love the community centers, and the pools, and so all of those are gonna be hard. As far as the police are concerned, we actually have a relatively small police force as big cities go, and we already have, our response times for a lot of crimes are pretty lousy, although they're much better for like crimes in progress. So violent crime in progress, there's somebody burglarizing my house right now. But people also make lots of calls about, suspicious person, welfare check, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the, and then the cops have some specialty units, like they've had a pretty successful specialty effort to prevent and return stolen cars and to prevent street racing. So those are so some of the choices we'll have to look at are, well, like, do we eliminate the human trafficking unit? Do we stop responding at all to calls other than crimes in progress? Do the cops scale back on the amount of time they try to spend in community when they are responding to an actual call? And so those are some of the questions they're gonna have to answer. With fire is the second biggest chunk of the general fund. And cutting fire is really hard because fire is mostly a fully staffed engine 24/7 in each of the fire stations. And if you cut that's most of what they are. And if you cut an engine or a shift in an engine, you're frankly, this might be a slight exaggeration, basically saying any house that catches fire in that neighborhood during that period of time is gonna burn to the ground. So personally, I think there are parts of the city where there's a station that hardly gets any calls, but like Burlingame, as I recall, this was 10 years ago when I oversaw the fire bureau for a few months. Like Burlingame, I think there were hardly any calls, but if you shut down that station, then if their house does catch fire in Burlingame, it burns to the ground. So fire is kind of this inherently inefficient thing where there's some places there's not much going on, but you want to write off those places. And then, the parks, as I said, there's the pools, there's community centers, you stop doing even the minimal upkeep that we do on the parks themselves. And then the homeless services, the city has spent money on these tiny house villages, which actually seem to be pretty successful, and people are more willing to go there than they are to the congregate shelters. And we were hoping the county was gonna take over paying for them and running them, but you might have seen the county has its own budget crisis, so they might not do that. So these are the yucky choices that are facing us. And then, I said that we might want to consider raising taxes. I can't actually think of any particular tax that I'm not gonna raise, although there was a tax that I got adopted when I was there, which is a surcharge on the profits tax we have on businesses. And there's a surcharge in businesses that pay their CEOs more than 100 times what they pay their typical worker. Which almost explicitly falls on like big Fortune 500 companies who do business there. And I thought that the surcharge I had was a little low, so I wouldn't mind raising it, getting a few $1 million. But anyway, I will shut up and just see if you have some initial thoughts about how we should go about dealing with this situation.
I do have a question from Martin about mayor wants to spend $28 million to do what? What's the context for that? And did it work before?
So what he wants to do is and 2,000 or maybe it's 2,800, I apologize, the new overnight shelter beds. And he thinks that if we had those, then anybody who needed shelter would be able to get it. And he says that he understands that we want to transition people to permanent housing, but there's not enough permanent housing, and he understands the tiny houses seem to be successful, but they're expensive. So he wants to just stand up a bunch more regular old congregate shelter beds, which he thinks he can do pretty cheaply. Now, I think that there's I mean, I agree with him, that ending unsheltered homelessness is a priority. I think there's serious questions, how many of the folks on the street will go to congregate shelters? I talked to one outreach worker a couple of weeks ago who said that when he offers people on the street a congregate shelter slot, 20% of them say yes. When he offers them a slot in one of the tiny house villages, 90% say yes. So I kind of think that you'd have to force people to go to the congregate shelters, and then so how many police are gonna want to do that? So I think he's a little optimistic. But anyway, this is what he ran on. I'm gonna end unsheltered homelessness by having more shelters. So he's pretty committed to that. And again, I mean, after proposing the budget, the city council can pretty much ignore him. But some of us are up for re-election in 2 years, and if the mayor runs against it, says, hey, get rid of Novick and all those other people, and see if refuse to end unsheltered homelessness. I mean, he might beat us. But that actually is a very influential in my decisions, but you can sort of see that happen. But anyway, his idea is our biggest problem is unsheltered homelessness. We don't have enough shelter beds, even for people who want them. Let's spend 28 million adding these shelter beds and operate them.
So, Martin added on there, there's 28 million in new expenditure. What's the budget cap in comparison right now?
Well, there's not really let's see, I don't really know about a budget cap. I mean, so when you look at the money we're gonna be short to keep on doing the things we're doing now. The gap, okay, yeah. It's, when you include the 28 million, it's 92 million. If you didn't include that, it would be 64 million. And then again, there's about 35 million cuts, largely in parts, which the administrator has already recommended. And then that leaves us with, depending on how you count, either 30 or 50 million in additional cuts that we have today.
I think Martin also mentioned about impound and sell cars with all the street racing and advertise that stop it and help them raise money. I think that was more of a comment. I don't know if there's a question with that, but anyway, do we have other questions regarding that? I'll also try to look online.
Yeah, Mr. Novick, thanks for coming to our meeting. In light of the Willamette Week article on urban forestry, I'm done with today or just today.
Yeah.
I don't think any of their monies are general fund earmarked, they're all separate.
That's a good question. I think a little of it might be general fund, some of it might be the parks levy. They've actually recently gotten a big chunk of money from the Portland Clean Energy Fund in order to plant more trees. But actually, I'm glad you asked that, because I got a presentation of the parks budget today and it didn't break out urban forestry, so I need to ask them. I think that right now they have something like a $26 million budget. I think a big chunk of that is Portland Clean Energy Fund money. But I think some of it probably is general fund or parks levy, but I'm not sure, but I don't know what it is.
I have a question to ask. It's related to budget, but it's more about from Woodstock Neighborhood Association perspective. For the past several years, decade and a half or something, I'm not sure the number, but we have to agree with the city in taking care of this building. So we have to split time, energy, funds, that kind of thing to help maintain this. I think we're the only neighborhood that has that condition, because we wanted to preserve this building so we can use it for space. And it turns out ever since Mount Scott Arletta, I think, closed, the city has used this facility to help offset some of that, which is a boom, obviously. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on preserving these kinds of buildings, or from our perspective, maybe alleviating some of the stress that's just on our neighborhood.
How much does the city put in for this building? Most of it. And how much is it though? right?
I think we spend about seven or 8 grand a year, in custodial services, products to help keep the
Okay.
facility running, and also the volunteer labor, which is not really common for the grounds, and, just making sure it looks, things are looking nice and it's accessible, or accessible as it is.
Mhm.
Cleaning the roof.
And cleaning the roof, yeah, those kinds of
repairs,
things.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the annual operating costs for the city aren't very high.
And then they offset most of their costs from what they get for the classes.
For what?
What they get from classes.
Okay, okay.
They're close to,
I
not
mean,
quite breaking even, but they're very close.
so, I mean, actually, I had a conversation with Parks about the budget earlier today, and they were saying that, Mount Scotterletta, which is supposed to reopen soon,
Yeah.
is one of the big ticket items, and if you're gonna have to make big cuts to parks, the larger community centers are, a place to look. So frankly, I mean, this is a macabre way of looking at it, but if we wind up closing or not reopening much of the large community centers, I think that, we probably wouldn't then also cut down the smaller, cheaper, and reduce funding for the smaller, cheaper places. At least I wouldn't.
One of the questions, I did a form for this meeting, and I did ask some people if they'd like to submit questions. One of the questions was, will opening that change funding for the Woodstock Neighborhood Association or Community Center? I'd like you're saying, or something.
Yeah, I mean, there might be an interaction, but I would hope that there would be an automatic.
And then there's a couple other questions I'll go ahead and rattle off from online from this form. Will our current presidential administration affect the funding to our city for Portland Parks and Rec? Particularly a lot of the cuts in funding, I imagine.
I don't think Parks and Rec gets much, if any, money from the federal government. We're, unless somebody knows differently, where the city is, there's some things that we're getting to the feds, like there's one-time money for some of our public safety programs, and for homelessness that was gonna go away anyway. There was some that, like transportation funding that we were supposed to get, like there's $2 million for electric vehicle charging stations, which is high on Trump's hit list, so that we might not get. But the city doesn't rely on direct federal funding in the way like the state does. I mean, the state Medicaid is like half the state budget. So if there's cuts to Medicaid, the state's in serious trouble. And the county gets a lot of state money for things like that too. But the immediate impact of the Trump cuts on the city aren't as great as in our sister governments.
Yeah, sure.
I'm glad to hear the Trump Public Safety Committee, because that does seem to be the key to making it more profitable to be in Portland. I go to a church that's downtown, and we were excluded from the clean and safe zone when the city drew it downtown, and we have ministry in 2 affordable housing buildings within the block of the church. They were also excluded, so basically just covered some high-end businesses and hotels. And yet, everybody downtown in our area has to pay at least 1 security company, we're now paying 2, just to have a modicum of security in our building, and yet we still get vandalized all the time. Had stuff stolen off the property. I've chased people doing fentanyl off the church steps a couple of times. Why would anyone want to open a business there? I totally understand why we have so much vacant real estate when we used to have vibrant businesses and restaurants and people walk around. It seems like making downtown safe would be a way to generate a lot of revenue because businesses would come back and we would have the beautiful downtown we used to have. Because right now, it's horrible. It is horrible.
I have a question for you. To what extent do you think the conditions you're talking about are associated with the homeless population? To what extent just sort of random crime?
I think more of it is random crime, because we do work with affordable housing folks. Yes, there are homeless people downtown. There were homeless people downtown in 2019, and it wasn't like this.
Hmm.
This is a level of crime that developed since like 2021, 2022. There was an open air drug market going down Morrison. You probably heard that Portland Clinic closed. They were also
Yeah.
excluded from Safe and Clean. They're one of our neighbors. They took off. Little cafe across the street from us, immigrant guy running it. I was with him when he talked to one of the city employees, about safety. He's had to close up business and leave, so it's another empty storefront on the street. And, you know, we're chucking out thousands of dollars, and by the way, we pay taxes on
Yeah.
every block of Portland because we have a parking garage, and yet we're excluded. The police do not show up, we have to call private security, who frankly, I don't trust, they're kind of thugs. But that's the situation we're forced into. And I mean, the affordable housing units across the street, I mean, they got no of even being safe on the street if they wanna walk a dog or go have a cigarette, that's not fair.
To try to bring it back though, what do you think the city should do budget wise? Like what,
Budget wise,
the
they need to
city is-
invest in those police.
into what?
Safety.
Rich, I guess I'm asking for more specificity. What does safety mean? Like when we're talking about,
Not letting people have an open air drug market on Morrison at 7 o'clock.
right, so how do we do that?
You
Are
need to have police presence,
So
you
we
need
need
to
to-
have better lighting.
So we're talking about cuts.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
We need
Well,
But if you wanna
increase.
generate revenue.
Right, I mean, and I think that, I mean, the fact that we're talking about cuts doesn't mean that we can't add some places, just means that means deeper cuts elsewhere. So like,
Sure.
I mean, we could, instead of, we could make, you know, $50 million in cuts in parks. And then maybe, I mean, to the extent I know anything about crime, and one thing I know is that crime does tend to be very place-based. Most crime occurs at a small number of locations,
Right.
and as you're saying, I mean, logically, the way you deal with that is you just have the police there. And you can't have that unless you have police. And I asked the deputy chief of police a few weeks ago, to what extent do we rely on hotspot policing? And he said, well, we don't really, because we're running from call to call. So we don't have people to spare to sort of sit in an individual place. Now, one of the tough questions I've been wondering about is like, we investigate hardly any property crimes after that. I've got a friend who owns a game store at 72nd and Foster. He was burglarized 3 times in 3 months, and nobody ever investigated. So one question I have is, well, the police respond to those calls, but then nothing happens. So one thing I asked the police chief is, well, should we move to a model where you don't have police respond to calls nothing's gonna happen with, but you transform some of them into detectives to investigate some crimes and put some of them on hotspot policing where they are locating themselves in places with a high level of crime? I mean, and the police chief said, well, if you tell people nobody's gonna respond when like their house has been burgled, they're gonna be pretty mad. And I was like, well, personally, I would be willing to have nobody respond if nobody was gonna do anything anyway. But I mean, that's it. So that's kind of the kind of conversation that we're gonna be having.
So, to follow on with that, I believe that the police force has had, there's been reduction, or there's been placeholders for new police to be trained, but that takes, I think, 18 months or something like that to get those filled. How many of those are not filled, that are gonna be filled, that are part of the current budget that would help improve over time?
I think it's about 100.
So we're adding 100 police officers
Unfilled positions
that are part of the budget.
that are part of the budget. But again, that's, I mean, one of my colleagues, actually, Councilor Rio, is asking, should we try to help balance the budget by not filling some of these unfilled spots?
No, we need the spots filled.
Well, also, adding 100 people to police force takes 18 months, which means that we have a downfall. So having to
but-
ramp it up, yeah.
But the one good piece of news we've had about the police is their recruitment is much better than it was a few years ago. So they're getting the applicants to fill these spots as soon, and so of that 100, I don't know how many of them are let's see, actually, I guess the 100 is people already been in training. But I mean, so yes, it does take a while, but you want to have the money there when people come on. And also, there's some, we can hire some laterals. I mean, as long as it's possible, you can hire people from other police forces too. So if you want to have the capacity to do that, you have to have the slots available.
How many are there currently?
Laterals,
No, the police officers.
how many total police officers? I think there's about 770 sworn or something, and 870 authorized sworn.
So then what about the street response? Like, is that Portland street response?
Portland-
I know a lot of people don't trust the police for up to
So, yeah, so Portland Street Response, which damn, I can't remember what the budget is, it's somewhere in like the 5 to 10 million range or something. That's another thing that the city administrator didn't recommend any cuts in that either. And obviously, a lot of people think that should be expanded, it should be 24/7, and they should be taking more of the calls that the police currently take. One thing that we're looking into there is, since Portland Street Response is providing to some extent somewhat medical, mental health treatment, one question is, could we get that reimbursed by Medicaid? And if we can do that, then that takes some of the expense off the city and maybe allows us to expand it. And what, I actually was having a conversation with an old friend of mine named Bruce Goldberg, he used to be the head of the Oregon Health Authority. And he said he's been involved in conversations about how to do that. He thinks it could be easier than other people have said. He thinks the Oregon Health Authority is throwing up sort of barriers to doing that aren't necessary. So he's like saying, we need to get to the governor and say, have them, blow up the barriers that enable entities like Portland Street Response, and there's other entities around the state too, to bill Medicaid for their services. So that's something that I will be pushing on, there's actually a meeting on it tomorrow. So if we can do that, then we might be able to expand Portland Street Response even without putting in more city general fund money.
All right, there's another question that was kind of a side, not to the budget necessarily, but to the politics of the new position, the new district, the other councilors. The question was, how is it working with the other councilors in the district and also the council itself? How has that been trying to get things started?
It's been fine. I mean, we just started the committees a few weeks ago, so like how the committees, to what extent will the Budget and Finance Committee and the county as the city as a whole respond, how will they respond to what the committees are doing? Are they gonna be deferential to the committee recommendations? Are they gonna start over? I mean, that's one of the things we'll have to see. I mean, the two, Annalita and Tiffany, my two fellow District 3 councilors, and we'll try to do as much together as we can. I'm on 4 committees, so I see pretty much everybody on a somewhat regular basis. I think that we're all settling in and trying to figure out our relationship with each other, the relationship with the committees to the whole council, the relationship of all of us to the mayor of the city administration. The one thing that I was somewhat involved in is, before we came in, the administration had told all city employees not to talk to city councilors. And it was like, what? And they were worried that, well, I think it was sort of a holdover of the old system where councilors oversaw bureaus. They were like, we're in a new thing where we don't have city councilors ordering city employees what to do on a day-to-day basis. And I said, wait a minute, okay, we understand that, but can't I call somebody up and ask them a question? And we'll promise, we'll swear as God's honor, we want to order people what to do on a day-to-day basis. So after some back and forth, finally the mayor and the administrator said, okay, it's all right to talk to city councilors. When they start telling you what to do on a day-to-day basis, tell me, and we'll deal with it. So that's an example of the kind of thing we're trying to work through. And when I call about like a specific issue that somebody has raised, I call a bureau and say, hey, I'm not trying to tell you what to do with this issue, but I want to understand the decision process that led to what's going on that somebody has an issue with.
All right. Go ahead.
Does your position on the budget committee just pertain to the general fund? Like if we have questions about budget, we talk to like the TNI?
At this point, no, to be honest, don't tell anybody who said this, I'm not quite sure what the role of the budget committee is. I mean, I think it should be to receive input from the substantive committees and then present proposals to the whole council. But given the concentrated calendar we're working with, I'm not sure to the extent that will work. So eventually all of us are gonna have to deal with the budget for everything. And so it doesn't matter what committee we're on. We are, the whole council is a budget committee.
Someone mentioned about, I think this is about registrations for vehicles. And there's a lot of they mentioned they bike around and see a lot of outdated registrations.
Yeah.
And, is there a way to hire somebody to scan which people are not paying, making sure that those get paid to help improve revenues?
So that's something I need to ask the police about. I would think they would probably say, we don't have time to do that, that's low on the priority list. And also, the other thing is that, I mean, it's not like, I don't think that the city gets money directly from finding people for having expired tags, so that's kind of a factor too, but, I don't think we do much of that, I don't know though, so I'll ask them and get back to you.
If they're parked, does it need to be police bureau enforcement?
If they're
or
parked?
can the city enforce?
Yeah,
Right,
I
take
thought
a-
the
because
P-BOT
parks
was
gonna-
gonna.
Yeah,
Well,
you
yeah,
call
they-
P-BOT for it.
Okay, yeah,
They
that,
call P-BOT when there's a.
right, yeah, and again, I don't know how, yeah, sorry, I should.
But it is like, what is the follow-up? Cause like they write a ticket and, well, they don't have tags, they don't, you know, they might
Right.
license plates from
Yeah.
tomorrow, like it
Right.
doesn't
I think if
really.
that was like resident positive, that would be.
And if you, someone mentioned about getting money if you authorize the fine because they're not abiding by, rules. So if the city, the police authorize a fine to somebody, does the city get paid for that? I don't know. I'm not into that.
Let me actually, I'm gonna send myself an email about that.
Okay.
I'll just email myself saying, ask about expired tags.
All right, I wanna be cognizant of your time too. You mentioned about 15, 20 minutes, we're a little bit over that. Do you have time to answer a few more questions?
Sure.
Have them?
Sure,
Okay.
I apologize, I will, I won't stick around for the rest of the meeting, because my dog's still getting used to having me at work all day, it's supposed to. But yeah, I can stick around for as many questions as you got.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So just a comment mostly, if I had to choose between police and parks, I would choose police, because if we don't have safe parks, we don't have parks. So I know that's a hard choice to make, and I would just look at that as a temporary fix until we can get things in a better place as far as safety is concerned. I think that, it's gotta be the number one priority. Everything feeds into, if you don't feel safe, you're not gonna operate a business, you're not gonna have, people that provide essential services for the city. So it's gotta be the number one, and whatever I think money has to be spent on that, if we have to take cutbacks to other places, I think it's worth it, at least on a temporary basis.
I really
It might be
appreciate,
forever, but
yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. I've noticed actually a shift from 10 years ago to today. I mean, we weren't dealing with the kind of budget cuts then, but 10 years ago when I was in council, if somebody would come to me saying, you need to spend money on X, I would say, well, where do you think we should cut? And the usual answer I got was, that's your problem, not mine. That was like, but it's all of our problem. I'm actually seeing a lot more people this past couple of months saying something like what you just said. Yes, I understand there are choices, here's the choice I would make, and that's really valuable.
Sonia?
So two things. One, we did approve some kind of parks levy, and I don't know where we are in the 5-year cycle on that. Because that was help pay for things as well. So that's been a little unclear, especially when we're talking about facilities. But I agree with her. And the other was, I get a little tired of the Downtown Business Association dictating how the rest of the city is gonna work. And that, like this person over here with the church downtown, that the clean and safe wouldn't cover them, even though they're a downtown property. And I've kind of had it with them. Yes, I want businesses down there. I used to work downtown. It was lovely. The rest of us also live here. Damn it.
I've been falling down on the job in terms of understanding clean and safe and how their boundaries are configured. But I should maybe be able to cheat and ask, the person I'm closest to in the council in the District 4 that includes downtown is Olivia Clark. So I need to ask her tomorrow, okay, explain to me how the boundaries are set. And I'm sorry, what was the first thing you mentioned?
The parks levy.
Oh, the parks levy, oh yeah. So, that's something that I've been talking to some parks advocates who said that, we've had this huge maintenance deficit for years. and we adopted a parks levy, and none of that goes to address the maintenance deficit. It went to hire more people, add more programs, but also a lot of it was chewed up by, we started paying people a lot more. It's been a 35% increase in salaries for parks employees, which, I mean, I'm sure they were wildly underpaid before, but that does come at a cost. So now what they're telling us is that, in order to maintain the same level of services, we need to double the amount of the levy. And that's before talking about the cuts the city is probably going to make in it. So, I mean, and does that mean, so then you're thinking about, well, we double the levy and tell people this won't even buy back the cuts that have already been made. So we really need to do a deep dive into the parks budget and sort of present people what sort of a park system do you think it's reasonable for us to continue to maintain, especially given the other demands of the general fund. As well as what level of levy, I mean, and that's another one. The downtown business folks have said if you increase the parks levy from 80 cents to 1,000, they will oppose it. And so frankly, I'd like to have them in and say, okay, you tell us which parks to close.
I believe, Anna, did you want to say something? You had your hand up. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, thank you. I have one question, comment question. You know, we hear all this question about safety and parks and recs and people, you know, getting engaged and creating a culture on their streets. And then I hear that there are quite a lot of budget cuts also for the Office of Civic Life, and which is really going into, you know, the core question, what's happening with our neighborhood association system and all these small grant programs, which actually contribute to quite a lot of very super local organized things that contribute to safety. Is that still a priority for the new budgeting? Because the cuts sound really dramatic on that end too.
I apologize, I haven't looked at what the cuts, since I know that it's so small, you can't make a big difference by cutting the Office of Civic Life, I haven't been looking at that, but I should, because it does matter. So I don't know the answer to that, and I'll check at least what the administrators' recommended cuts were, and I'll email that to y'all, as soon as I at least can see that.
There's a lot of talk about cuts. I would like to hear about potential revenue. I understand, I'm a property taxpayer, I fully understand there's no appetite for raising things like property taxes. Is there some sort of avenue for, I know like the PSEP that comes out of like very profitable corporations was approved by voters. Does council have any sort of way of?
Well, I mean, we could decide to,
Can I piggyback on that?
yeah,
Is there any talk about a vacancy tax?
there is, people have talked about it, I actually think it's illegal. Because, it would be, because this under state property tax law, every property has to be taxed in the same way. So we had an extra tax for vacant properties every year. Now, I have a whole slew of property tax reforms I'd like the legislature to send out for people to vote on, and that's one of them. But right now, we can't do it, we could only do it after, I mean, this isn't rock solid, but my understanding, looking at the law and talking to the lawyers, is that the odds are we passed a vacancy tax, it would be overturned. So we need we need the legislature to ask the voters to allow that to happen. My question for you, I mean, I think that council could simply adopt a sales tax, or PSAP is a gross receipts tax, which frankly is a sales tax in disguise. But I mean, we could do that. Last time I polled a local sales tax, it polled for streets when I oversaw PBOT, it polled terribly. But I mean, actually, show of hands, if we're going to explore newer increased taxes, how many of you would want to look at a sales tax?
I really prefer not a regressive tax.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it's not a great idea, but I don't like any of the cuts
Yeah.
either, but that's why.
Property tax is a great one.
Yeah, how many would support a new property tax for the city general fund?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Because
I
some
think
people
it's
say
probably
no
a miss on
online,
the
some
tape.
people say
Okay.
fines or something.
and then, What was and what about an increase in this thing, this is what the downtown business folks are being proposed. What about a temporary increase in the business profits tax?
Absolutely.
What's it called, the tourism tax or something?
Oh, yeah, I need to ask, I mean, I think that we have to under state law divide that with I don't know, I need to ask that. I mean, Thomas Lanham, the head of the city's revenue bureau, he was there when I was there, and I've been meaning to get him on the phone and say, okay, Thomas, take me through everything that we've even looked at for the past 20 years. And that's one of the things I need to ask him about.
And that, every other city has a tourism tax.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah, we do. I don't know how it compares to others.
I believe, the state, the way the taxes work in Oregon is that it goes to the state and is distributed to the counties, and I'm assuming the city, I'm not sure how the city works.
Yeah, I don't know
Counties.
what chunk of the tourism tax.
Yeah, so,
Well, I mean, just kind of going back to the safety thing, if we want tourists to come here, we need to have a desirable city for them to visit.
Yeah.
And then tax them. But right now, I don't know that we have a huge influx of tourism. I mean, in certain areas we do, but not for the city. I mean, they're going to Multnomah Falls, they're going to the mountain. They're not coming to like they used to downtown. They're
Well,
going to the parks.
I will tell you a nice thing that I noticed in the past couple of weeks, which is the New York Times travel section, the first time in a while, recommended one of their top 5 spring break places to go was Portland.
Yeah.
And they listed places in some of the neighborhoods, like my old neighborhood, Old Village, they listed things, so, at least the New York Times is starting to be on our side again.
well, Counselor, I want to let you go and continue helping our communities and the city and making good decisions, and we'd love to have you back.
Of course.
When you're capable, but also extend that to the other counselors. In the district. Appreciate that, and so thank you very much for joining us tonight and for answering all these questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much. By odd happenstance, your 3 councilors are sort of divided into north, south, middle, and north. Because Tiffany is at 43rd and Hawthorne or something, and I believe it's up in Burnside, so I'm holding up the southern end of the district.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.